In a jaw-dropping twist, Joel Osteen has just revealed a family feud that's been brewing for years. Known for his calm and positive image, Joel has left everyone stunned by exposing the deep tensions with his mother-in-law, Joanie Lamb. For years, their ministry seemed like a smooth operation, but now it's clear there were some serious unresolved issues lurking beneath the surface. This isn't the first time drama has stirred within the Osteen family, but this time, Joel isn't staying silent. So what made the man known for spreading positivity finally open up? For years, the public has admired Joel for his leadership and the success of his ministry, but now, his revelations about his relationship with Joni are making people question everything. These shocking revelations come just as the public was already aware of growing tension within the Lamb family. There have been whispers about power struggles, manipulation, and even accusations of spiritual abuse. But now it's all out in the open. What made Joel take such a bold step? Could it be the years of unresolved issues finally catching up with him? What exactly went down between Joel and Joni that pushed him to speak out? The Osteen family, once seen as the picture of unity and faith, is now facing a major divide, caused by the very forces that once brought them together. What does this mean for the future of Lakewood Church? The atmosphere in the meeting between Joel and Joni was reportedly tense, with emotions running high. Joel's decision to go public isn't just about airing personal grievances, but about the impact this family drama is having on their ministry and the people they serve. After all, the Osteen family has built one of the world's largest ministries with millions of followers. This feud isn't just a personal matter, it's a public spectacle that could shake the foundation of everything they've worked so hard to build. So, what does this mean for the future of their ministry? Are these shocking revelations a sign that the Osteen family's hold on power is weakening? Joel's decision to finally speak out comes at a time when the public is craving the truth. The Osteen family has long been viewed as an untouchable force in the megachurch world, but now the cracks are starting to show, and everyone is watching. People are fascinated by how power struggles and family dynamics can influence the direction of a massive organization like Lakewood Church, especially now that Joel has exposed the tensions between him and Joni. Everyone is left wondering what's going to happen next. Can the family heal their broken bonds, or is this the breaking point that'll tear everything apart? Joel's explosive statements have left the world in shock, and the fallout is just beginning. This is no longer just a family drama. It's a tale of betrayal, power, and control with consequences that could go way beyond their personal lives. With Joanie Lamb now at the heart of the controversy, many are questioning her authority and how it affects those closest to her. As the dust begins to settle, one thing is certain. This story is far from over. Is it spiritual guidance, or is it manipulation dressed up as divine authority? When Jonathan and Susie Lamb came forward with their own shocking experiences involving Joni, it hit the religious community like a bombshell. They spoke out about feeling spiritually manipulated by Joni, who used her position of authority to control their actions. During a meeting in July 2023, Jimmy Evans told Jonathan and Susie they had to submit to Joni because her voice was the voice of God. This claim left many reeling and raised serious questions about Joni's leadership. Was this really divine guidance, or was it just a way to control people? Jonathan's response was quick and revealing. He asked why he needed to listen to Joni instead of hearing directly from God himself. His concerns weren't just about family politics, but also about how spiritual authority was being used within the ministry. This wasn't the first time Jonathan and Susie had felt this kind of pressure, but it was the first time they've gone public with their accusations of spiritual abuse and manipulation. Their claims paint a disturbing picture of how power can be wielded in faith communities, raising the question of where the line is between family issues and the larger problems in the ministry's leadership. During the course of the conference, it became abundantly clear that Joni's control over her family consisted not only of providing guidance, but also of ensuring complete compliance during the meetings. As Jonathan came to the realization that he had been coerced into adhering to decisions that were not in accordance with his own convictions, his level of aggravation increased. Additionally, the manipulation was not limited to making decisions for the ministry. Rather, it was aimed at manipulating the personal lives and decisions of those who were closest to her. By virtue of the fact that his position within the family was at stake, the pressure to comply with Joni's wishes only increased as the conflict became more intense. One of the most important questions that everyone is currently asking: is how far Joni is willing to go in order to maintain control over both the ministry and her family. The presence of Jimmy Evans, a respected family counselor who appeared to support Joni's point of view, is one of the factors that contributes to the uneasy nature of the scenario. As a result of his assertion that Joni's voice is the voice of God, a number of severe red flags were raised, and she was placed in a position that was both powerful and easily challenged. Did she genuinely seek spiritual advice, or was she merely attempting to strengthen her hold on power? As their basic religion was being called into question, Jonathan and Susie were left with the impression that they were trapped. How does the line between authority and manipulation get so readily blurred? And what exactly is the genuine function that spiritual leaders play in a ministry that is controlled by a family? After the meeting, Jonathan and Susie felt betrayed, not only by Joni, but by the system that permitted this manipulation to happen. Their public accusations call into question the way in which the ministry has been managed, and it is difficult to dismiss the truth that lies behind their statements. What happens when a family's spiritual foundation is based on control rather than trust? And what is the actual cost of remaining silent in the face of manipulation? These are the questions that the world is left asking as they continue to speak out. When Joanie Lamb's second marriage to Doug Weiss became public, it sent shockwaves through her family and added fuel to the flames of the relationships that were already strained. Things took a turn for the worst. The marriage between Jonathan and Susie appeared to drive them over the brink despite the fact that they were already having difficulties with Joni. What was it about her marriage that caused such a stir? Jonathan and Susie believed that it was not merely a matter of personal preference, rather, it was a violation of the principles and ideals that the family holds dear. They did not think that Doug Weiss would make a good spouse, especially considering his history of divorce and the fact that he had lived in other relationships. Many people inside the family and throughout the ministry questioned Joni's motivations after she made the decision to marry Doug just a few short months after Marcus Lamb passed away. What was the nature of this relationship? Was it a genuine one, or was it an attempt to keep power because her spouse had passed away? In addition to Jonathan and Susie, there were other people who were concerned about the date of the wedding and the nature of the union. Several individuals within the ministry also expressed their unease. On the other hand, Joni's reaction was prompt and severe when Jonathan and Susie refused to openly endorse it. Regardless of how they felt about her marriage, she insisted that they support her union and threatened them with consequences if they did not comply with her demand. As the family proceeded to come apart, it became abundantly evident that Joni's activities were not only about her personal life, rather, they were questioning the entire core of the family's ministry, as well as the beliefs that they had spent years building up. Not only did the Lambs consider Joni's marriage to be a violation of the family's principles, but they also considered it to be an insult to the legacy that Marcus had left behind. Due to the fact that the marriage between Joni and Doug became such a contentious subject, the Osteen family found themselves at odds not only with one another, but also with the fundamental beliefs that had previously served to bring them together. Never before had the stakes been higher, and the most important question was whether or not the Osteen family would be able to endure this. The tension that had been building up inside the family reached a boiling point, which resulted in a dramatic meeting in which Jonathan and Susie were forced to confront Joni over her activities head-on. Joni was adamant about standing up for her marriage and the choices she made, and she refused to back down. Because Jonathan and Susie found themselves caught between their personal values, their religious obligations, and their obligations to their families, they were under a tremendous amount of pressure. Their inability to publicly endorse Joni's marriage ultimately resulted in a public fallout that would change everything. In the end, this would change everything. However, the question that remained was, what happens in the world of faith when personal beliefs and devotion to one's family come into conflict with one another? Jonathan and Susie's refusal to support Joni's marriage was more than just a disagreement. It was a bold declaration that called into question the basic basis upon which Joni's power was built. Both their relationship with her and the ministry would be profoundly affected as a result of this course of action. As the breach within the Osteen family became public knowledge, the Lambs, who had previously been devoted followers of the Osteen family, unexpectedly found themselves on the outside looking in. Is it possible that this gap may be mended, or did it represent the pinnacle of their involvement in the ministry? On July 11, 2023, the family gathering that took place between Jonathan, Susie, Joni, and Jimmy Evans would be remembered as the moment when everything began to fall apart at that same instant. In light of the fact that the Lambs were required to engage in a heated debate on their decision to not officially endorse Joni's marriage to Doug Weiss, the stakes were quite high. Evans, who had been brought in as a mediator, made a statement that shook Jonathan and Susie to their very core when he asserted that Joni's voice was the same as God's. This assertion caused the encounter to quickly escalate. In spite of the fact that they had always respected Joni, this particular moment displayed a level of control that was not only stunning but also difficult to accept. There was no mistaking the emotional response that Jonathan displayed. He had always been of the opinion that the message of God should be heard immediately, without going via middlemen. He was left with a sense of being misled and spiritually manipulated by the notion that he was being instructed to surrender to Joni's interpretation of the will of God toward him. A quarrel that began as a debate about a marriage gradually escalated into a very personal attack on their faith and their capacity to hear God's voice for themselves through the course of the conversation. What was supposed to be a disagreement among the family turned out to be a spiritual conflict, with Jonathan and Susie being caught between their own views and the high expectations that their family had for them during this time. An intense level of tension pervaded the room. Jonathan, who has always been a staunch supporter of his convictions, resisted what he perceived to be an act of spiritual harassment. He inquired of Evans the reason that he was being compelled to acknowledge Joni's assertion as the unquestionable truth. The response that he received was both uncomfortable and conclusive. Evans and Joni asserted that their direction was divinely inspired, and there was no place for questioning or disagreement with their assertions. It was not merely a discussion about theology. Rather, it evolved into a struggle for authority. It was communicated to Jonathan and Susie that their spiritual obligation was to surrender, or else they would be perceived as being defiant. It was made abundantly plain that their faith, their families, and their jobs within the ministry were all at stake because of the situation. Despite the fact that the debate was becoming increasingly heated, Joni and Evans continued to assert that Jonathan's unwillingness to obey was not only a challenge to their authority, but it was also an insult to God himself. It was now that the allegations of spiritual abuse, which had been brewing for years, were brought to light with all of their fury. It was not enough for the Lambs to just disagree with the decisions made by their family. They were also accused of committing a transgression against the divine authority of their family. There was no question about the choice that Jonathan and Susie had to make. They could either continue to suffer in silence, or they could stand up for what they considered to be right. However, this was not merely a disagreement of the ordinary. Rather, it was a crisis of faith, one that had the potential to rock the entire foundation upon which their ministry was built. There was a terrifying atmosphere in the final moments of the meeting. In a cool and collected manner, Joni made the announcement that Jonathan and Susie would no longer be permitted to participate in the ministry if they were unable to follow her example. The Osteen family's public image of oneness was destroyed, and in its place was a splintered and damaged family that was struggling under the weight of the decisions that they ultimately made. Both Jonathan and Susie were aware that their lives would never be the same again as they left the office. The Osteen family, Lakewood Church, and the millions of followers who had placed their faith in their leadership would all be affected by the shockwaves that would be caused by this meeting. On the other hand, the charges of sexual molestation were the source of the most serious darkness in this story. A sinister problem that had been brewing within the Lamb family for years was brought to light by the Lamb's allegations that Joni had manipulated their spirituality. These allegations went much beyond a simple theological disagreement. They showed something much more profound. An important turning point was reached when Jonathan learned that his daughter had been mistreated by a member of the family. This discovery was the beginning of a series of events that would forever cause the family to be divided. The reaction of Joni and Marcus Lamb was what made this situation even more painful than it already was. Instead of showing their support for Jonathan and taking action, they backed the family member who was accused of the crime and dismissed the charges as being without foundation. As far as Jonathan was concerned, this was a betrayal that went much further than anything he could have conceived of. Why would his family choose to disregard such a severe allegation? However, the painful understanding that their love to each other surpassed their loyalty to the truth was the catalyst for the anguish that they experienced. It was not just the lack of support that occurred. The fact that Joni and Marcus did not take any action left Jonathan with a sense of being abandoned and alone. Not only did this betrayal have an impact on their personal relationship, but it would also have long-term repercussions for their ministry. The inquiry into the abuse was deemed weak and defective, which brought about an even more gloomy disposition to the situation. The family was informed that the accused had been cleared of any wrongdoing. Nonetheless, Jonathan and Susie were aware that something was not quite right. The investigation had been hurried and left unfinished, and the truth had been concealed in order to protect the reputation of the family. Jonathan made a daring act of disobedience when he decided to speak out about the abuse. This decision put him at odds with his own family and put his position within the ministry in jeopardy. Jonathan was under an unbelievable amount of pressure to maintain his silence, but he was aware that he could not allow the truth to remain buried. After the public had a deeper understanding of the human problems that the Lambs had been going through, it became abundantly evident that the spiritual abuse that they had endured was just the beginning. The allegations of sexual assault, in conjunction with the absence of accountability inside the Osteen family, provided a disturbing picture of an organization that was more concerned with safeguarding its reputation than it was with ensuring the health and safety of its members. The stakes had never been higher for Jonathan and Susie than they were just now. Their unwavering dedication to truth and justice led them down a perilous path, one that would ultimately result in the loss of their jobs, their reputations, and their relationships with their families. The repercussions from these discoveries was felt well beyond the Osteen family, and it prompted questions regarding the role that leaders have in religious organizations and the obligation that they have to safeguard those who are vulnerable. Accusations of both spiritual and sexual abuse threw a dark shadow over the ministry, and the public started to wonder how much of the Osteen family's success was predicated on concealment and deceit. The allegations of sexual abuse were particularly concerning. What had been concealed in the past was now exposed to the public, and there was no way to make things go back. As the controversy that had been surrounding the family continued to escalate, Jonathan found himself in a situation in which his future in the ministry was hanging by a thread. In spite of the fact that he had a profound devotion to both the church and his family, he did not comply with the demands that Joni and Doug Weiss made, which resulted in both personal and professional repercussions. Jonathan was left with no choice but to step down from his position as a leader at Lakewood Church after the encounter with Joni and Evans, which was a very charged interaction. Not only did he lose his career, but he also lost his sense of purpose and his connection to the one and only life he had ever known. Joni made the decision to let Jonathan go after careful consideration. She made this choice because she was of the opinion that retaining control over the ministry was far more important than maintaining family loyalty. However, Jonathan had a sense of betrayal, not only from his mother, but also from the entire system that had previously provided him with support. The email that he sent to Joni, in which he requested that they have a conversation about the matter, was not responded to for several months. He was left to cope with the aftermath on his own, rather than receiving the clarity and resolve that he had imagined he would receive. Jonathan encountered nothing except silence and rejection from all around him. In addition to making the situation even more difficult, Joni gave him a false sense of hope by telling him that his termination would not have an effect on the payroll for the time being. When he was finally terminated from his position, however, that hope was immediately dashed. The professional treachery that Jonathan's own family committed against him was more devastating than he could have ever thought it would be. The dynamic of the family, which had been constructed over time on the foundation of unity and shared religion, had now been irreparably broken. Consequently, he was left wondering not just about his position within the family, but also about his position in the ministry, which had at one time felt like a calling to him. As a result of severe personal disagreements, the ministry's legacy, which had been built up over the course of many years, was completely destroyed in a matter of months. Being forced out of the very institution that he had helped to establish would have an emotional toll on Jonathan that would remain with him for years to come. And the harm that was done to his relationship with his family appeared to be irreparable. Jonathan did not waver in his conviction that the truth should be presented to the public, even though he was experiencing intense anguish. Jonathan was unwavering in his commitment to upholding his beliefs, despite the fact that the betrayal from his mother and the aftermath from their spiritual struggle were extremely difficult to endure. Truth and openness were two things that he was well aware of being essential to the future of his family as well as his ministry. Even though he did not hold a position of authority, he was adamant that his perspective would be conveyed to the audience. The public was beginning to notice the flaws that were hiding behind the surface of their family life, which had always been lauded for its picture-perfect nature. In the course of several months, the internal battle that existed inside the Osteen family became public knowledge, and both supporters and critics of the conflict expressed their opinions on the matter. Jonathan's departure from the ministry not only represented the end of an era, but it also opened the door to a debate that was much needed concerning power conflicts, spiritual abuse, and family relationships that had plagued the Osteen legacy for many years. The story of Jonathan, on the other hand, was not yet finished. Despite the fact that his own personal life was falling apart, he insisted that he would keep fighting for the integrity of his family. While Paul and Susie were in the process of re-establishing their lives, they gradually began to uncover the full depth of what had been going on behind closed doors inside the Osteen family. There was a great deal more information that was going to be disclosed, and the public meeting with Joni and Evans had only been the beginning. The discoveries that have been made regarding the Osteen family and their ministry are quite alarming, and these findings are likely to have a significant impact. It is without a doubt that the public disclosure of the emotional and spiritual manipulation, the questionable judgments made by leadership, and the cover-up of serious claims will have long-term ramifications for their ministry, as well as for their personal relationships. There is a possibility that the harm to the ministry's reputation will be irreparable, particularly in the event that a greater number of persons come forward with their own accounts of physical or emotional abuse or manipulation. There is a possibility that the trust that was already established between the leadership and their followers would be severely damaged, leaving the Osteen family to deal with the consequences of this situation. They may now question the integrity of the ministry, and the reputation of its leaders will be put in peril. People who formerly considered the ministry as a light of hope may think differently now. There is a possibility that the Osteen family, and Joni in particular, will have difficulty maintaining control over the ministry as the public opinion shifts. In particular, as more information becomes available, those individuals within the ministry who have been loyal to the leadership up to this point may start to reconsider their commitment to the organization. A considerable number of followers and financial support could be lost as a result of this, which would make it even more difficult to keep the same degree of power it currently possesses. Those who are courageous enough to speak up, like Jonathan and Susie, may motivate others to do the same, and the consequences of their actions may have implications that spread throughout the greater Christian community. There is a possibility that the truth will continue to emerge, which will result in a more thorough investigation into the number of other ministries that may be functioning under control and manipulation systems that are comparable to those that have been exposed. For all intents and purposes, the future of the Osteen ministry may be contingent upon the manner in which they react to these discoveries. There is a possibility that they will be able to heal their relationship if they make an effort to reconcile, admit the abuse, and rebuild with transparency and accountability. However, if they continue to divert attention away from the deeper problems and protect their legacy, without addressing those problems, the ministry may have a difficult time surviving in its current appearance. An unclear path lies ahead for the Osteen family, and the legacy they leave behind may be irrevocably altered as a result of these occurrences.